Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the beginnings of the May Day fun. I have been commissioned to spread the tale of the San Diego free speech fight. And that is what I am here to do today. I'm going to play a couple songs along the way to help illustrate the points, but mostly it's going to be some good old-fashioned storytelling complete with notes. Who here is not familiar with the San Diego free speech fight if you haven't already heard the story even a little bit? Okay, well good, because then it'll be more interesting if you've never heard the story before because it's super absurd. All right. It happened 101 years ago that a momentous and historic battle took place right here on the streets of San Diego when two opposing forces, each with their own starkly contrasting vision of social order, fought for the future, no, the very heart and soul of this sunny paradise. In 1912, the San Diego free speech fight, like many great stories plucked from the vast annals of history, legend, folklore, and ancient mythology, pitted the primordial forces of darkness and light against each other in yet another episode of that eternal struggle. Now get your minds out of the gutter of monotheistic dualism. We're not talking about a battle between good and evil. It's more, like I said, that internal struggle of necessary polarities spinning around in a cycle like night and day, winter and summer. No, I'm just kidding. There is good guys and there is bad guys, and everyone knows that the bad guys wear black. Let's start with the bad guys. They wear white. An elitist brigade of sun-loving Anglo-capitalist entrepreneurs, media tycoons, city boosters and bankers, public officials, racist vigilante goons, and the entire political establishment of San Diego. And, in other words, the combined forces of institutionalized capitalist authoritarian control, united in their exclusionary vision of a white Anglo upper-class playground free from the urban blight, pollution, and class and race conflicts of other industrialized cities. A quiet little beach town, a theme park, a tourist mecca for other overprivileged, wealthy, wandering wasps. Now, the city's elites knew that if they were to build this little paradise, they would need to devise a growth plan that avoided the importation of an unruly working class. Let's keep them out. Central to this strategy was their decades-long obsessed courtship of the Navy, which they envisioned as being a complementary industry along with their growing tourist industry. If they had the Navy here and the tourist industry, we don't have to worry about anything else. This exclusionary, classist, and racist vision of America's finest city was truly designed as an experiment in class-based, top-down social engineering. And that, my friends, is how the city of San Diego was incorporated. To this day, this horrible vision is still propagated by a thriving tourist industry that buries its history under a mountain of booster mythology. As Jim Miller wrote in Under the Perfect Sun, if history is not dead in San Diego, it is certainly on life support. So basically, what it was this beautiful bourgeois paradise for rich and retired, old money, old families living high on the hog. Those kind of people that like to brag that they were descended from the Pilgrims. Those kinds. A life of leisure sustained by the exploitation of unskilled Mexican service and agricultural workers, along with non-unionized Asians, blacks, and poor whites that did all the work to keep that paradise afloat. No surprise there. And most of these folks lived in this little part of the town of San Diego called the Stingaree District, a neighborhood that we now know by its bougie theme park name, the Gas Lamp District, to help complement the Old Town District, which celebrates this mission history that really didn't quite happen. What are the other themed neighborhoods? Little Italy? Oh, Seaport Village, a quaint little New England fishing town. San Diego. Now, this Stingaree District, this neighborhood before it was crawling with drunken frat boys barfing in the streets, was actually full of shops, saloons, cheap hotels, gambling houses, opium dens, and brothels. To the ruling elite, this part of San Diego represented the most exotic and debased vice and violence, and the unruly others who did not fit America's finest cities' theme park picture of the tourist industry. And it was here, in that neighborhood, or there, in that neighborhood, that would eventually become the battlefield of the San Diego free speech fight. Now, speaking of unruly others and undesirables, let us now flip the proverbial coin over to the other side, to the forces of darkness, the harbingers of destruction, and proponents of dignity and solidarity, and occasionally sabotage. The industrial workers of the world, the IWW, or the Wobblies, as they like to be called, a ragtag army of migratory workers, hobos, and bindle-stiffs, unskilled toilers of all races, genders, and national origins. They were socialists and anarchists and other undesirables, united in a common vision of a new social order. In order to actualize this new social order, the basic strategy of the IWW would be the weakening of the capitalist system through action at the point of production, which would form the structure of this new society within the shell of the old. The vehicle would be the one big union, which, when strong enough, would carry through a general strike of all workers in all industries to abolish the wage system, seize the means of production, and establish this new social order. A wobbly poet was to make the philosophy, which is actually known as anarcho-syndicalism, endearing, with this famous stanza from the labor hymn, Solidarity Forever. In our hands is placed a power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of armies magnified 100-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the union makes us strong. Thank you. Speaking of that, why don't I just do a song for you guys? Yeah. This is a song by T-Bone Slim. I believe it's from 1913. It's one of my favorite IWW songs. Kind of just talks a little bit about what the poor working bindle stiff had to put up with trying to find jobs and traveling around, and had to pay sharks, you know, to actually get a job. Might not even get paid. So this is kind of a punk version of T-Bone Slim's Mysteries of a Hobo's Life. I took a job on an extra gang way up in the mountains. I paid my fee and the shark shipped me, and the ties I soon was counting. The boss, he had me pulling spikes, and the sweat was enough to blind me. He didn't seem to like my pay, so I left my job behind me. Well, I grabbed hold of an old freight train, round the country traveled. The mysteries of a hobo's life to me was soon unraveled. Oh, I traveled east and I traveled west, and the sharks could never find me. The morning I was miles away from the job I left behind me. Well, I ran across a bunch of stiffs known as industrial workers. They taught me how to be a man, how to fight the shirkers. Well, I kicked right in and I joined the bunch. Oh, in their ranks you'll find me. Hooray for the cause, to hell with the boss and the job I left behind me. And there you had the attitude. Now, a little quick background on the IWW. They were born officially on June 27, 1905, at the First Continental Congress of the Working Class in Chicago. In the audience were 200 delegates from 34 state, district, and national organizations. There were socialists, anarchists, radical miners, Catholic workers, and revolutionary industrial unionists, all united in opposition to what they called, this is kind of funny, they were sort of pitted against the American Federation of Labor at the time. And so they called them the American Separation of Laborers, Craft Union. And they criticized them for craft unionism, conservative leadership, and their non-class conscious, racist, xenophobic, and sexist policies, as well as their own desire to establish an industrial labor union that would ultimately overthrow the capitalist system and create a cooperative commonwealth of workers. It's quite a vision. Some of the speakers that day included radical miner Big Bill Haywood, socialist leader Eugene Debs, and at the time, the most dangerous woman in America, Mother Jones. Now, 5 months earlier, in January 1905, 30 labor radicals met to consider plans for a new revolutionary union that they hoped would be capable of successfully operating the country's industries after the fall of capitalism. That's brilliant. Seriously. They drafted a manifesto, an analysis of industrial and social relations from the revolutionary viewpoint, and criticized existing trade unions for basically promoting a skilled aristocracy. And then they posted the whole thing to Facebook and it got out. Okay, actually the manifesto was printed in great quantities and distributed around the country in the old-fashioned way, by hand, with an invitation to come to Chicago and attend this convention in June to found a new revolutionary working class organization, the Industrial Workers of the World. Now, keep in mind, in the early 20th century, aside from not having Facebook, there was also amenities that they didn't have. It was an era where work was scarce, and even worse, because when you could find work, it was dangerous and it was deadly. Now, in the U.S., capitalists at the time were also able to operate with virtually no labor laws, and automation was pushing skilled workers into that hazy underworld of the ranks of the unskilled. Times were hard for the working poor and the unemployed. Thousands of migratory workers lived in these little camps that they called jungles, and hot freight trains traveling all over the country in search of any paid work. They'd check all the mines and mills and factories everywhere just trying to find any kind of work. In order to get a job, typically, a hobo would have to actually buy one from an employment agent or a shark, who after taking your money would either take you to your job or just completely rip you off. So if you didn't have money to buy a job, you just couldn't get one. Now, even if you did manage to get a job, the bosses weren't really under any real legal obligation to pay you your wages. So, and any act of defiance was met with brutal repression, beatings, and murder, as the bosses had, check this, the combined weight of non-union scabs, the police, the National Guards, private security organizations such as the Pinkertons, as well as armed mobs of vigilantes on their side. That's a tough fight. In addition, mainstream media outlets, all owned by industrial tycoons, railed against the creeping socialism of labor organizations, and they waged a campaign of slander, upsetting the general populace with villainous portrayals of bomb-wielding anarchists, murderous hobo transients, and barbarous foreigners. Now, on top of this already impressive list of enemies, nearly all of the prevalent churches at the time joined in, including the Salvation Army, who I wasn't going to tell this quick little story, but they loved coming out to mess with the IWW when they were out doing their soapboxing. They would come out with their little Salvation Army band and just start blaring all this music. And the IWW, being a musical bunch that they were, they kind of figured out a tactic to get back at them, which is that they just started writing revolutionary lyrics to all the hymns that the Salvation Army was playing, so they got a free backup band. So anyway, these churches, what they were doing, though, was spreading this virulent, puritanical philosophy in an effort to basically brainwash the poor into believing that their class status is ordained by God. You know, and that they would glorify the despair of the workers' toil as their ticket to the pearly gates. And they also railed against communism and anarchism and trade unionism and all that. They just wanted them to sit back and wait until they died where they enjoy that pie in the sky. Now, in response to this impressive informal coalition of enemies, the Wobblies set out with vigilance on their own campaign to lift the working poor from the pits of despair and shame and to develop a class consciousness and a sense of dignity through the solidarity of the one big union. They began publishing The Industrial Worker in 1906, distributing it by hand. It's still published to this day. I think there was a 3-year period between 1913 and 16 when it kind of stopped for a little while. But it's still running, isn't it? Okay. Now, these Wobblies, Although they was a rough and tumble bunch, always ready for a fight, these traveling IWW hobo propagandists, they were a jovial bunch. They filled the industrial worker with short stories, poetry, one-act plays, biblical satires, cartoons, searing political ballads with clever sarcastic lyrics, usually sung to the tune of spiritual hymns, Irish rebel songs, and popular music of the time. They'd be lampooning the bosses and the judges and the cops and the preachers, as well as glorifying the previously unsung heroes and heroines of the common working stiffs. I think it's time for another song. This is an old one. Anyone ever hear Harry McClintock?
Yeah. He had a song featured in a movie several years back that was pretty popular.
He had a song featured in a movie a couple years back that was pretty popular called Big Rock Candy Mountain, which is kind of like the hobo heaven where you go. He also wrote a song in the 1890s. He was a little older than some of the other fellers. That was a take on a spiritual thing. You guys ever hear a song, Revive Us Again? Okay, well, he wrote the song, Hallelujah, I'm a Bum. Because I don't want you to think that the Wobblies were all about just work, work, work. They weren't like the communists or the fascists or the capitalists, and that they were just glorifying mindless toil. They believed in, and they looked forward to a day when they might actually get a break. And if they couldn't get a job, well, they'd just go on the bum. So here's a song by Harry McClintock called Hallelujah, I'm a Bum. Oh, why don't you work, bum, like other folks do? How the hell can I work when there's no work to do? Hallelujah, I'm a bum, bum, hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. Why don't you save all of the money? Why don't you save all of the money you earned? If I didn't need, I'd have money to burn. Hallelujah, I'm a bum bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. Why like my boss, he's a good friend of mine. That's why I am starving out on the bread line. Hallelujah, I'm a bum bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. Oh, I can't buy a job 'cause I ain't got no dough. Ride in a boxcar for I'm a hobo. Hallelujah, I'm a bum bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. Whenever I go for the money I've earned, the boss will be broken, to work he must turn. Hallelujah, I'm a bum bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. When springtime comes, oh, won't we have some fun? We'll kick off our jobs and we'll go on the bum. Hallelujah, I'm a bum bum. Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a handout to revive us again. Harry McClintock. Where were we? We haven't gotten to San Diego yet, have we? Oh, shoot. Tactically, the Wobblies refused any labor management contracts, as they were viewed as an interference with labor's only weapon, the strike. They also opposed voting and reformist political activism in general in favor of direct action, which generally meant strikes, worker slowdowns, and the threat of industrial sabotage, which was all represented by their little black cat that they used as their symbol, the Sabotabby, who was basically intended to be this kind of threatening image of the possibility of sabotage. And they kind of used it purposely because it conjured up images, you know, in superstitious puritanical America of all things that are malign and sinister and kind of connected to witches of the past and things of that sort. So they had this black cat, and they actually have stories and cartoons involving this cat leading the workers out into the wheat fields to set little, you know, to sabotage things. As far as I know, I don't know if they ever actually did really do any industrial sabotage. Now, speaking of their tactics, now we're getting close to San Diego. Between the years of 1908 and 1916, the IWW engaged in over 30 free speech fights. From Missoula, Montana to Spokane, Washington to Fresno. And finally, they got down to San Diego in 1912. Now, during these battles, they campaigned for the rights to agitate on city streets in an effort to turn bums into men by transforming the attitudes of these folks. By transforming the attitudes of the town's small disposable labor force from shame and defeatism to solidarity and working class anger. Nearly every one of these towns responded with free speech restrictions, which culminated in bloody street battles, which often left many Wobblies severely injured and sometimes severely dead. Now, it's important to note that their intentions had little to do with defending abstract constitutional principles, such as free speech. The aim was actually to show workers who were dubious about legal and political reform the effectiveness of victories gained through a strategy of open yet nonviolent confrontations with public officials, and ultimately to preserve their recruitment efforts. Right, Rudy? You dig it. In 1911, we're almost there, IWW Local Number 13, based in Holtville, arrived in San Diego and began to organize the poorest workers in the mill, lumber, laundry, and service industries, and eventually, this is what really ticked off the powers that be, organizing Mexican workers in John Spreckle's streetcar franchise, and then they struck. And then the funny thing was that the Baja Revolt started in the Mexican Revolution, and all these Mexican workers ran off to join the revolution. The Wobblies didn't know what to do, so they followed them and joined in on it. That's a whole other story, though. Point being is that by organizing these Mexican workers, the Wobblies had struck a major nerve and made themselves a very powerful enemy of Spreckles, who was basically a typical robber baron, industrial tycoon bastard with interests in a variety of capitalist ventures, and he happened to own the San Diego Union newspaper, which eventually swallowed the Tribune and became the Union Tribune. In stark contrast to the rich white Anglos' exclusionary vision of San Diego, the IWW opened its doors to all workers. In fact, they were the only American union to oppose racial exclusion, and they organized Asians, blacks, Mexican, Jews, and recent immigrants. Nobody was doing that. So basically, really, what it was that the IW represented in San Diego was an upsetting of the racist and class hierarchy, clashing with the city elites' mythological version of the past and their social Darwinist dreams of the future.
Yeah.
That's right. But for that transgression, Rudy, the Wobblies could not. They could not be allowed to speak or occupy public space, or for that matter, even exist in the presence of the Boosters' vision of the future. They had to go, and Spreckles was determined to figure out how to do that. And by pure luck, an incident occurred on January 6, 1912, that eventually enabled Spreckles to successfully lobby the city for an ordinance to block free speech in a 49-block range in the Stingery district. The Wobblies were out doing their thing, soapboxing at their usual location, Heller's Corner, at 5th and E, when an angry white guy, who also happened to be an off-duty constable, which is fancy word for cop, I believe, ran his car into the crowd, blaring his horns, trying to disrupt the speakers. So, of course, what do you think happened? His car got rocked, and his tires got slashed. And that's what happens when you ride your car into a crowd of people. In response, after pressure from Spreckles, the city passed the ordinance banning street speaking that went into effect on February 8th. This ordinance was immediately met with civil disobedience by the California Free Speech League, which united the IWW with their old foes in the AFL, along with other socialists and anarchists and even some liberals, and even local religious leaders who were also affected by the ordinance. A little shaky coalition. In the end, most of the other groups bailed when things got rough. Now, local IWW member Laura Emerson, 2 other women, and 38 men were the first to be arrested. More arrests followed, leading the Wobblies to announce it would flood the city with protesters. They put out a national call on Facebook to come to San Diego and join the fight. Oh, that's right, they didn't have Facebook. Somehow they got this call out there. Twitter. And then it happened. The city elitist's worst nightmare was realized. Just picture this, close your eyes. Waves of dirty, unshaven, foul-mouthed hordes of rough-and-tumble singing anarchist hobos flooded the streets of San Diego. People were appalled. At the urging of city leaders, prompted by vicious editorials by Spreckles, I love saying Spreckles. I think it's just pronounced Spreckles, but Spreckles. The cops responded with increasing brutality, wading through the crowd with their batons flailing everywhere, recklessly beating people, and then arresting them and dragging them to jail for more beatings. 65-year-old Wobbly Michael Hoey was so savagely beaten by cops who left him to lie on the cold floors of the overcrowded, vermin-infested jail cell for weeks that he eventually died, and he was the first known casualty, martyr, of the San Diego free speech fight. Now picture this. 5,000 people showed up to protest. And of course they were mercilessly assaulted for over 4 hours with fire hoses, then beaten and arrested and eventually dispersed. Later that month, another Wobbly by the name of Joseph Mikolasek, I totally didn't pronounce that right, was shot and killed by cops as he stood outside the IWW headquarters. And now, instead of an investigation into this illegal murder, their headquarters were raided and shut down, and more Wobblies were rounded up and jailed. While in jail, though, this is funny, the only response many of the inmates could do was to sing. The purpose was, of course, to express solidarity and defiance, but it was also to drive the jail guards to their wits' end. Police Chief Wilson summed it up in this quote: "These people do not belong to any country, no flag, no laws, no supreme being. I do not know what to do. I cannot punish them. Listen to them singing. They're singing all the time, yelling and hollering and telling the jailers to quit their work and join the union. They're worse than animals." That's a great quote. The funny thing is, does anyone know what's considered the most powerful union in California? The prison guard union is the most powerful union in California. So they got part of it right. There are some professions that should just not be allowed to have unions. Sorry. I imagine that one of the songs that they may have sang while they were in jail was this little ditty that was actually sent out to the masses all across the country in the campaign to get people to come to San Diego to join in on the free speech fights. It's called Bound for San Diego. Town called San Diego, and the workers try to strike. The cops will beat them with their clubs and tell them to take a hike. They throw them in the bullpen and they feed them rotten beans, and they call that law and order in that city. So it seems. So we're bound for San Diego. You better join us now. If they don't quit, you bet your life there'll be an awful row. We're coming by the hundreds. We'll be joined by hundreds more. If old Spreckles gets his... gets his way. Oh, I messed up. The clubbing fellow working folks who dare their thoughts express. And if old Spreck... You know, the problem is I changed the lyric because they talk about old Otis, who was the owner of the LA Times that got bombed by the AFL, and he was railing. But I wanted to bring Spreckles in again because I like saying Spreckles. So I'll see if I remember to say Spreckles this time. They're clubbing fellow working folk who dare their thoughts express. And if old Spreckles gets his way, they're sure to be a mess. I did it! So swell this army working folk and show them what we'll do when all the children of toil unite in one big union true. We put the town of Aberdeen with others on the map, and the brass band thugs of all of them was handy with the sap. But the IWWs are folks that know no fear, and will whip old San Diego if it takes 100 years. Hasn't happened yet, but some folks are working on it. Does anyone have any questions, rude comments, or scathing criticisms? Back to Chief Wilson. Now, if that guy thought that the brutal treatment dished out by the cops were insufficient, vigilantes, this is when it starts getting scary. Vigilantes urged on by the local press and ignored by the cops took up the terrorism where the official violence left off. Spreckles Union praised the vigilantes and openly threatened anyone who might oppose them, and even ran their official vigilante announcements, which said things like proposing the deportation of these undesirable citizens after they had left their mark on them. Basically, the vigilantes taught patriotism and reverence for law by torturing, beating, and branding their victims before running them out of town. Most people that spout a strict adherence to rule of law don't really believe it. They only mean it for other people. Now, in one of the most notorious incidences involving these vigilantes, you had 400 well-armed, drunken men, not unusual in San Diego, wearing white armbands, stopped a southbound train from LA carrying 140 wobblies on their way to San Diego. Now, I'm going to describe what they did, and I'm going to tell you beforehand that it was very terrible. And if you're sensitive to hearing about traumatic things, you might want to close your ears because it was pretty horrible. These men were kidnapped and taken to a cattle corral where they were forced to run a gauntlet of over 100 vigilantes who punched, kicked, and beat them with wagon wheel spokes before being forced to kiss the flag and sing the Star-Spangled Banner. Then they were sodomized with wooden sticks, tarred and branded with the letters IWW on their asses with lit cigars. After all this, they were forced, beaten, bloody, and broken, to follow them tracks back up to LA. At least 2 people died that we know of. Nobody knows how many wobblies died during these particular altercations and were left out in the desert. Now, by the time Emma Goldman, the most feared person in America at that time, everyone know who Emma Goldman is? History lesson. Very, 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 very famous Russian anarchist that, lived in the United States and organized mercilessly. And she was like one of the main, thinkers of the time. And, the establishment really just kind of hated her. She advocated everything from free love and birth control to smashing the state. But she also denounced the Bolsheviks because she was deported there after opposing World War I and got to see it firsthand. But anyway, I digress. By the time Emma Goldman arrived in San Diego to speak, now this would have been a huge event. We got fucking Emma Goldman, you know? So she shows up with her partner, the esteemed hobo doctor, Ben Reitman. At this time, vigilante terror was truly at its height. So these two arrive at the train station, and they're surrounded by an angry lynch mob of vigilantes at this train station screaming for blood. They're screaming, "Give us that anarchist whore. We're going to strip off her clothes and we're going to hang her." They're saying stuff like that. So Goldman and Reitman narrowly escaped and made their way to the U.S. Grant Hotel, where yet another angry mob had gathered outside the beautiful part of downtown that we now call Horton Plaza. Now, while Emma Goldman got pulled into this little meeting with the police chief and the mayor because she's a bigwig. When the bigwig radical comes to town, they get to meet with the police chief and the mayor to unsuccessfully demand that they clear the mob or let her speak to them. They wouldn't do either. But while this was going on, her partner, Ben Reitman, was kidnapped by businessmen, aided by cops, and handed over to the vigilantes, and he was subjected to the same ritual of terror. It so traumatized him that he just could never forget about it. He eventually wrote a poem about it, kind of addressed to Emma Goldman about what was kind of happening to him, what was going on in his mind. And I've taken the liberty of turning it into a really bad song. Oh, it's not really bad. I think it's okay. Yeah. It's in E. It's kind of an old bluesy style. So this is Ben Reitman's experiences and his poem to Emma Goldman. If you utter a sound or make a move, we'll kill you. Then they gathered round me. One man grabbed my right arm, another man grabbed my left. The third man grabbed the back of my coat, and into an automobile we go. Wish I could describe terror in that 20-mile ride. Wish I could describe terror in that beautiful California moonlight. In an auto with 6 men and a chauffeur. Yeah, these Christian patriots. They put fingers in my eyes and nose as they subjected me to torture. Yeah, the torture that a God-fearing man is capable of conceiving. I wish I could describe terror in that 20-mile ride. I wish I could describe terror in that beautiful California moonlight. You won't kiss the American flag? Well, by God, we'll make you. Yeah, we'll ram it right down your throat. Sing the Star-Spangled Banner with feeling. They put their autos together so the lamp set a sickly stage light. Yeah, 14 defenders. 14 defenders of this country, all commanding me to undress. They poured tar over my body and hair, and in the absence of feathers, they rubbed sagebrush instead. I wish I could describe terror in that 20-mile ride. I wish I could describe the terror in that beautiful California moonlight. My suffering was terrible, but my greatest pain was over you. My greatest pain was over you. Oh yeah. Wasn't so bad, huh? In her autobiography, Living My Life, Emma Goldman recounts how Reitman honestly was just never the same after that assault. The following year, Goldman and Reitman returned once again after his recovery in order for her to speak one more time, to try it again. Again, they were driven out by the vigilantes, leaving him forever scarred and consumed with terror. Finally, Emma Goldman returned without Reitman after the free speech fight was technically over, and she was finally able to speak unharassed in 1915. In the end, nobody was ever held accountable for the blood shed by those by the vigilantes. There was no justice for the martyrs that died on the streets of San Diego for free speech. But technically, the free speech fight was won when the ordinance was lifted in 1915. Yet, at the same time, the terror that the IWW had to endure took its toll and successfully did clear the city of those undesirable citizens and sent a message to marginalized groups that the price for stepping outside the accepted parameters of political activity in San Diego was a very steep price indeed. And the same city elite continued to maintain unquestioned control over the destiny of the city. And they would have their Panama, California exposition, which we're going to celebrate the 100th anniversary of in 2015. They did eventually lure the Navy to town. It turned out to be not exactly what they wished for, but they got it. And they also ensured the city's conservative course for decades to come. And the story of the San Diego free speech fight was ultimately buried under a mound of revisionist booster history, a colorful but forgettable part of our past. And that's the San Diego free speech fight. But I say fuck that. And I wrote a song inspired by this book called Under the Perfect Sun that it's what the San Diego tourist industry doesn't want you to know. It's where I got most of my information from regarding this free speech fight. Jim Miller is so eloquent with his words. And the whole book is really just about all the hidden history of San Diego that just kind of needs to be let out, all these ghosts that need to be exorcised, that the tourist industry just kind of really wishes never happened. And so I wrote this song. It's a snotty punk rocker called Under the Perfect Sun that kind of talks about when I first moved to San Diego, just sort of that feeling that you're in a town where just full of people that just didn't really get, the ghosts of their past. Give me a liposuction, give me a spray on tan, make a good impression, maybe marry a Navy man. My nose is made of plastic, watch it bubble up in the sun. Life is so fantastic, I don't care about anyone. Living under the perfect sun. Where we live, everything is fun. America's finest city, fuck, I don't know how that handle stuck. Corruption, scandal, corporate greed is San Diego city creed. Run for office, you're invited, someday you might be indicted. Proud to be an American and live under the perfect sun. Hummer, now I'm buying an SUV. Another endless summer, hope it lasts an eternity. Give me global warming, crank up the perfect sun. Another splendid morning, I don't care about anyone. Living under the perfect sun. Where we live, everything is fun. America's finest destination, bring your family on vacation. If you come to our fair town, we won't tolerate no frown. Happy happens, that's our thing. Everyone must dance and sing. Get some Botox, have some fun, but don't eclipse our perfect sun. Got a condo in the city, round the corner from Petco Park. The gas lamp is so pretty, watch it glittering in the dark. Each village is so funky since they got rid of all the bums. Derelicts and junkies, give me Prozac and lithium. Living under the perfect sun. Where we live, everything is fun. America's finest superficial city should be our official slogan. As we celebrate the past, we disassociate history from the days of old that visitors are never told. Peel the ivory skin veneer, the shade where you can see more clear. City's hidden history, life vacant, burnt and blistery. Battered neath the sunny lies, white Anglo-urban paradise. Unresolved, still resonating, the naked truth that lies awaiting to be found by anyone hiding in the shadows of the perfect sun. Living under the perfect sun. Where we live, everything is fun. Living under the perfect sun.